Good evening and welcome to the Mark Twain Library. I'm Elaine Sanders, the Adult Programming Coordinator at the library, and on behalf of the library and the Reading League of Women Voters, welcome to Conversations, Truth, Myth, and Democracy. This is our award-winning series with the mission of continuing our community conversations on the issues of race, justice, and democracy. We are delighted to have our own library director, Erin Shea Dunmeyer, moderating this evening's discussion. This program follows a number of collaborative conversations organized by the Reading League of Women Voters and the Mark Twain Library, whose partnership in this endeavor began in the fall of 2019. The series is brought to you in association with the Easton Public Library, Newtown C.H. Booth Library, Ridgefield Public Library, Weston Public Library, Friends of the Weston Public Library, the League of Women Voters of Ridgefield, the League of Women Voters of Northern Fairfield County, and the League of Women Voters of Weston, and in partnership with media sponsor WSHU Public Radio. We are recording tonight's program, so feel free to let your friends and neighbors know if they were not able to join us tonight that there'll be a recording of the program available to view on the library's YouTube channel in about a week. And we have set aside time for questions towards the end of this evening's program. You are welcome to put your questions in the Q&A function at any time. So please submit your questions as you think of them. That way we'll hopefully have time to get to as many as possible. And we are also offering closed captioning. It's at the bottom of the Zoom bar, at the bottom of your screen. So you can turn that on if you wish. And so friends and neighbors, without further delay, I will hand the evening over to Erin. Erin, thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening at the virtual Mark Twain Library for another installment of our conversation series. In recognition of Banned Books Week, tonight our conversation will focus on censorship and race in regards to the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, a novel frequently deemed controversial and written more than 100 years ago by our founder, Mark Twain. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn has been banned somewhere every year since its publication in 1907. But it does not stop there. Already in 2022, the American Library Association has documented challenges involving 1,651 different books, and the list keeps growing. The freedom to read is key to America's democracy. To discuss this growing concern, I'm honored tonight to be joined by Dr. Jocelyn Chadwick and Samantha Lee. Dr. Jocelyn Chadwick is a former professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and past president of the National Council for Teachers of English. Dr. Chadwick is an expert on issues of censorship and race in education. She's spoken extensively on the role of race in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Pudd'nhead Wilson. She's published several books and articles on the way Twain's interpretations of race should be taught to today's school children, including The Jim Dilemma, Reading Race in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and Uncle Tom, The Stereotype, The Man Jim in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Samantha Lee is the co-chair of the Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. She's head of reference services at Enfield Public Library, and she has been recognized for her work with the 2020 American Library Association Gerald Hodges Chapter Relations Award, a 2019 Connecticut Library Association Intellectual Freedom Award, and most recently, a 2022 Connecticut Library Consortium Jan Gluz Cooperative Spirit Award. It is a privilege to have you both with us this evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Erin. It's great to be here.
So to kick things off, I was talking to my husband about tonight's program, and he said, Erin, you need to know that only teachers and librarians know what Banned Books Week is. So, Sam, could you share with us how you define a banned or challenged book?
So we're going to start with a challenge. A challenge is an attempt to remove or restrict materials based upon the objections of a person or a group. Materials can mean books, music, television shows, movies. And a challenge isn't just somebody expressing their opinion. It is the effort to and the attempt to remove that material from curriculums, from libraries, and then to restrict that access. A ban is the successful removal of that material.
Thank you. And Jocelyn, I know that you have taught and wrote extensively, specifically on the book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And it's understood that the book's subjects and language are from an earlier era, and that it seems were advanced for the time it was written. But particularly in the current political and social climate, can see why teachers and school librarians may want to tread carefully. What do you say to those professionals about taking on books or subjects that might be offensive or controversial, particularly when there's so much else that teachers have to deal with nowadays? Are we asking too much?
Well, as an English language arts teacher, and my idea is that all roads leads to ELA. So that in an English language arts class, we're walking a minefield, even teaching Little Red Riding Hood. I mean, she steals, she breaks, she's a break and enterer. So, I mean, my point in going to Little Red Riding Hood is anything can be challenged, anything can be banned. And Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and many of Twain's other works, A True Story, Pudd'nhead Wilson, he was a writer of conscience. I think with, for example, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, if one really reads that text, it's his primer for Huck Finn. Huck is actually the main character in that story, even though Tom is the title character, but it's Huck who has the challenges of conscience and race. I mean, he eats with a slave and he's not supposed to do that, and it just shocks Tom Sawyer. And I bring that up because when you teach an English class, whether it's elementary or high school, what we used to call regular classes, honors classes, advanced classes, the idea is to empower all of our students with lifelong literacy and to allow them a safe space in which they can experience different cultures, different people, different languages, which is a dialect as well as a real language, see themselves from a safe distance where they can talk and express their views. That is a huge load for a teacher to carry. And I will tell you, my primary concern now is the difference in generations. When I first started teaching, students were very quiet, very calm. They did everything you asked them to do. They didn't question. It was, a parent might complain and the book was taken away, but teachers had more say in terms of diversity of texts and so forth. Now with Gen Z, it's almost the opposite. The students are more inquisitive. They're more tending towards inquiry. They want to explore. They want to wrestle with the text. The parents or citizens who are even outside of the school district now have a say. And the rapidity with which they're moving books is frightening. It is just absolutely frightening. And so my concern for teachers is that we're not overloading them, but we're not giving them the tools they need to navigate those waters, not the history of the text, the timing of the text, how to teach that text, how to go about the pedagogy of your different audiences, because this audience of students is very, very different.
What happens then when teachers say, you know what, I don't even want to take a risk. I'm just not going to teach these types of texts. I mean, what happens to our educational system?
That depends. It depends on if teachers feel that they have a resource or if they have a way to reach out. And that's so one of the reasons I tell teachers, I normally give them my cell number and say text 24/7. It stays under the pillow. Don't email me, just text it. I will send resources. I will talk to students. Sometimes it's easier for someone like myself to go into a classroom than for the teacher to try and teach a challenged text. Teachers just simply will, someone wrote me last week, I have not met him. He just said, I've listened to you and I'm going to go in for the plunge and I'm going to try. And I said, that's great. If you have any problems, just text me. I said, here's my email. just, send me a note. I promise I will help. And he wrote back, he said, I'm going to hold you to that. And I said, I tell teachers this all the time. It's okay. It's fine. So I think what the deal is, being able to let teachers know you're not supposed to know all of it. We can help each other within our community, and you can reach out, and there's going to be someone there to help, to answer the question, or to take the brunt of it. Because I understand once I walk into a classroom what the ante is, and I never quite know how it's going to fall out with parents or administrators, but the students generally, I'm fairly prepared for their inquiry, which is far more rigorous than my graduate students.
Mhm. Just listening to you speak about that, it really reminded me of the field of librarianship, in that we're all sort of trying to look out for each other when we receive book challenges. And that brings me to my next question for Sam, because for those who don't know, Sam is really the person who Connecticut librarians call when they do need that professional support. So it sounds like Sam is the librarianship supporter that Jocelyn is for teachers.
Yeah.
So Sam, if we encourage teachers and school librarians to take on these issues in their classrooms or in their libraries, how do we protect them from potential fallout?
I mean, we try and support them best we can. It helps to have a supportive administration from the get-go. And allies are everywhere in our classroom, especially with young students and inquiring minds. They are paying attention very closely to the conversations that are being had on the large front, and they are smart, they are eloquent. I have to give props to the 5 teenagers in Illinois. They recently, I forget their names, and I'm kicking myself for this, but there's 5 teenagers in Illinois that went up against their, not their school board, but against some really dedicated parents who were ready to remove books. And they stood up and gave testimony. They wrote articles in their school newspaper. They organized. And for their efforts, they were recognized with the Illinois Intellectual Freedom Award. It's hard work. We can't do this in isolation. As much as we can believe in our professional ethics and rely on our training, which is extensive. But we have master's degree. We go through a lot of education. We are highly trained professionals. Falling back on that training is a smart way to go, but also knowing that we have this beautiful collaborative community that provides support to each other, and looking out into our community to find those allies that would advocate for us. I'm a big fan of union organizing. Unions are awesome to protect workers, to protect schools, teachers, librarians. Unions are awesome, and unions do hard work. And I'm happy to be a card-carrying union member.
So speaking on that and sort of that professional support you get when you receive a challenge, Jocelyn, you touched a little bit on how it sounds like you are someone that colleagues turn to a lot for that support. But what else could school librarians or teachers look for if they want to move forward with a potentially controversial book? I mean, do they need mentor support, administrative support? What do you think is the ideal scenario for a teacher to have if they're going to move forward with a book that is often challenged?
In a school, the ideal support would be the administrator. When I started out, I had the best principal, and I didn't realize it until I had left that high school and was working on my graduate degrees. But I work with a couple of schools in New York now, where particularly one in elementary, where the principal is absolutely a support. I mean, he is a learner. When I visit that school every year, virtually or in person, and he's in the classroom, and the kids can see him learning and see him asking questions. And so administrators, I know that they're loaded, but for students to see that the building administration is not only supportive and is also an enforcer of rules, that person can also be a learner with them and in their classrooms. That speaks volumes for the students. And with the libraries, it would be great. I'd love for libraries and schools to work more closely together. And I know in some places they do, as with where we are now. And Sam is brilliant. I mean, I was just sitting here saying, yay, yes, that's just great. If we had more of what Sam is doing or what Rebecca Cohen is doing at Summit Library, and other libraries, those aren't the only two, but those are the ones that pop up in my mind, what you guys are doing. And then with Summit, where the community can come in. And as Sam said, the kids can speak. If a parent hears his or her child say, I don't get why they're banning books. And this is a paraphrase of a quote of a middle schooler. I don't get why they're banning books. If they don't even know the name of the book or the author, how can they tell me they're going to ban it if I want to read it? I mean, and so that's coming from a middle school child. And it's so logical and it's so impassioned that parents do have to take a moment to think that through and what's the purpose. So the support from the administration, the support from the community, letting the community come in and see what's happening, and how those texts, how the students engage in the text. Sam, you're so right that this generation is so voiced. They do read, they do question, and it makes for a richer exchange. And I don't think parents are actually familiar with that. They're more from back of our generation of, just being deposited. We had the information deposited and we gave it back. But their kids are very, very different.
Mm-hmm. I love that that principle was modeling intellectual curiosity, but also like you're mentioning earlier about teachers being really honest with themselves, saying like, I don't know if I'm going to do this right, but I have Jocelyn to text. And that's beautiful because modeling intellectual curiosity and then intellectual honesty is something that we shouldn't shy away from our youth and our young students. They will appreciate that. They are sponges. They understand when somebody's being real and when somebody's not. And it's worthwhile having that honesty with students from the get-go.
Jocelyn, do you feel like when a teacher is teaching a text like The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and let's say they're teaching a class where the racial makeup has one Black student in it, should they change how they teach a text like that?
Since I've been sometimes the only Black person in the classroom, or early in my career, I would send these papers out for conferences. And once I walked in the room, they would say, you're Chadwick? And I thought, yes, last name is Chadwick, first name is Jocelyn. I get the face doesn't go with the name that you think. It's all good. I mean, any question that could be asked of me, I think I've been asked, including how did I arrive in Texas? Slavery and ancestors. I mean, it's that kind of thing. So you can't, when I read that particular question and when you pose it now, we can't teach, we teach students. Mm-hmm. We teach personalities. And we must be cognizant of all of our students. So yes, if I have, and I have students who are Asian, who are Latino, who are all sorts of people, in the class, I do want to be, I'm always watching, even when I'm visiting schools via Zoom or in person. The students know that I'm looking at them. I am connecting with them, and I make known. I love that shirt. That's a great shirt. That was a great question that you asked. What was up with that question? Students have to feel, as Sam said, free to express themselves. So even if it's the only student of color in that class, and you're teaching a controversial novel, or the student is of a different religion and you're teaching a text that is talking about a different religion from that student's, you're always going to be cognizant or aware of all of your students and having the rules. As I tell teachers, day one, last day, same rules of decorum. We don't do anything weird in terms of talking to each other or say things. You leave that at home. We're talking about book. And one story that goes to what you were talking about. I was reading to a group of fourth graders a true story, and one young lady, little girl, fourth grade, stood up and she said, well, I have a question. And I said, okay. And she said, well, why didn't you tell them, the class, that blackface is not okay? And in my head, I processed and I thought, you processed this short story 1,000 times. And that one, how did you miss that? And I said, but you're right. You are correct. You are right. Blackface is a term that today is not used at all. We see it as not an acceptable term. However, the mother in this story is talking about her son, and she's describing his face and the scar. And so she's not using that term as it was used as in the 19th century or in the 20th century. And that what we had was a lesson on how language changes. And she said, okay, so I got it now. It's okay that the mom said that. I said, yeah, so the mother's just talking about her son. She wasn't using the term blackface as we understand. It's a no phrase. We don't use that anymore. So yeah, you don't want students to feel that you are singling them out simply because of their ethnicity or their gender or their whatever. They are the group. And you navigate that in that way. And as Sam said, they will trust you if you do that. If you're fearful, don't teach the text. I mean, that's the other thing I tell teachers. If you're fearful, please don't. Just don't. It's better that you don't, because they will smell the fear.
I'm really in awe of teachers.
Very much.
So, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Obviously, we love the book here, but I want to hear from you. What makes this text worth it? What makes it worth teaching?
My father read this book to me aloud when I was 7. He was a great Mark Twain fan. So I necessarily became a great Mark Twain fan because my dad read it aloud. Little did I know that I would end up doing what I do with Mark Twain, but that was my first introduction to Mark Twain. My parents surrounded me with libraries and librarians and books. But as I started teaching at Irving High School, it was my juniors actually who had a pained look in their faces when I started teaching Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I'd had such an affinity with it all my life, teaching it to, in this case, it's the flip side. You talked about the only African-American child or Black child in the class. That group was mostly white with a couple of Latino kids and a couple of Asian kids. I was the only Black English teacher, the first one they'd ever hired. So I was odd person out, so to speak, and they were hurt for me. And I remember calling my mother, the elementary school teacher, saying, "Mother dear, this is what happened today in school. I'm not quite sure what is going on." And my mother, so intrepid, she said, "I told you that you needed to go back to graduate school to learn more about your craft. It seems that this is where you need to go now." And that was my path back to graduate school, because I realized I didn't know enough about the period, about how they felt in terms of the rhetoric of that book, of the dialect. And again, this is Texas. Texas is filled with dialect. Everybody, no one in Texas speaks the same way. If you're in the West, you have a certain dialect. If you're in the East, a certain dialect. But here with these students. So in that sense, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is the first of its kind. We've had the slave narrative from the late 18th into the 19th century. We've had novels in the South, like from Thomas Nelson Page, championing slavery, saying how wonderful it is, and so forth. Mark Twain is the first person who actually writes about slavery in the real sense, not Uncle Tom's Cabin, but with a strong persona of a free African American. Some forget the free professor at the very beginning, but he's so critical because he's vocal, he's in the South, he's walking around, he's college educated, and he sets Pap Finn's teeth on total edge. And then you have Jim. the family man, the man who redacts the Bible to fit his definitions. And you see the relationship between Huck and Jim, and Huck as one who has accepted slavery and all of that just as it is. So in that sense, the book is one of a kind, and it does have language that is sensitive. And I would ask those who would want to censor it, is that language any more sensitive than some of the songs that our students, our kids listen to? Or are we going to censor Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he uses the same term, or uses Negro, which is now totally, we don't use that term anymore. Where do we stop all that if we're going to just, take Twain out of it? Twain is an uncomfortable read. And I always question anyone who said it was great. I loved it. I don't know how you can love the book. I mean, I love the book because of how it makes me feel every time I read it. And I love it because the students with whom I share that book have asked me so many different questions that I wouldn't have thought up. Like what lens did I read that book through when I was a teenager versus with them now? And that's coming from a junior in Virginia. And before I didn't have students who asked me questions like that.
Yeah, what are the students' reactions nowadays to that book?
Well, I'm glad you asked me. I have some quotes. Rather than tell you, I have just four quotes. A fourth grader. After reading this, a true story. After reading this with you, I want to know about the role of women. In all of your teaching, have you ever experienced the kind of treatment of discrimination, stereotypes in all of your years? That one took me by surprise. Again, coming from a fourth grader, and that's where her head was. She was processing about the role of women. Another says, talk a little bit about the complicated history of the book. It's been banned because it was deemed too vulgar. Some audiences say that it is racist, not understanding the satire behind it. The student puts that in quotes. Overall, what do you say when confronted about the book's history with certain audiences? And another student says, the lens kid, what is your favorite lens in which you view this novel? Through a biographical perspective, through the lens of race, social commentary, coming of age, turbulent relationships between parents and children, trauma, historical. And the final quote, how was Twain able to write in all the different dialects? Mark Twain analyzed romanticism and criticized its lack of relatable dialogue in the sense that, quote, people don't really speak that way, unquote. How do you think Mark Twain would defend his work now that the modern vernacular has progressed and his words also seem out of date? And when I don't normally go into classrooms, I will ask teachers to make sure that if students have questions that they weren't able to ask when I'm there, the teachers can curate them on a Google Doc so that I have time to actually answer all of the questions that they have. But those are the kinds of questions that I get from fourth grade through 12th grade.
Well, that fourth grader should come moderate this discussion because that question is wonderful.
I love
that wild.
Like that fourth grader has intersectional, like,
Yeah.
Like that fourth grader, intersectional learner, gets it, understands it.
Yeah. You should join our conversations committee.
I never quite know where the students are going to take me now with this generation. So I'm always sort of prepared to say, gosh, I hadn't thought of that before. That's a pretty good idea. Let me think about that for a moment. They just take me to different places.
So as I mentioned earlier, it is Banned Books Week. And Sam, I know that banned books are a huge part of your work. Why should the average person be concerned about book censorship? Should they encourage their children to read banned books?
Absolutely. Parents should be encouraging kids to read banned books. They should be encouraging their kids to read any book, especially their favorites. My concern about banned books and censorship is control. Censorship comes from a place of wanting to inflict control on people. And that is wildly antithetical to our democratic ideals for this country. The moment we have this freedom to read because of the freedom of speech. Our freedom of speech is also the freedom to receive speech, and therefore the freedom to read. And that's a pretty radical thought, that here we have the founders of our country who believed in the free exchange of ideas and thoughts and philosophy so that they could make a more just democracy for everyone. That's a beautiful, radical idea that they came up with. And that only exists when we have the freedom of speech and the freedom to read. So the moment we start the moment we start caving into book bans and censorship is when we start turning away from our democratic ideals. It's about authoritarian control.
So I was going to ask about repercussions that reach beyond the book itself, but authoritarian control is certainly one of those repercussions. How do we start a conversation about the freedom to read within our own communities?
So certainly not every book is for everyone. And with instances like with Mark Twain, sometimes you need a guide to walk you through it, to bounce off complicated ideas. But that's a celebration. That's not something to be scared of. That's not something to panic about. When a child is reading a text and they have questions, I think that's a beautiful moment for parents to have this communion with their children and say, okay, that's interesting. Let's talk about it. Let's have this conversation. Modeling, again, I go back to modeling intellectual curiosity and intellectual honesty. I think having those conversations are important as a family, but talking about censorship and talking about our freedom to read within our communities, I think it's a celebration. We, instead of talking about the doom and gloom of these books getting banned, which is deeply upsetting and wildly problematic, there's celebration there, like absolutely the freedom to read. And if you're not a reader, and I know there are plenty of people who aren't, it's also the freedom to listen to music. It's the freedom to consume media that you find an infinity to. That's also your freedom, and I think that's worth celebrating.
I love that. And you found a way to put a positive spin on book censorship.
And normally I'm the cynic.
Jocelyn, due to all the debate around banned books, teachers and librarians may prefer to avoid adding controversial titles to their collections or displays or their syllabi. Self-censorship could be happening consciously, but also unconsciously in classrooms. Do you feel this is happening, and are there ways to support teachers, educational institutions, or libraries so it doesn't become a growing concern, this unconscious self-censorship?
I can understand why teachers would be concerned. One of the things I caution all of us about is, one of the things I think parents worry about is our influence on their children. And we're not their parents, we're not their guardians, we are their teachers. We are tasked with a monumental job of providing them K through 12 with skills to read, to listen, to talk, to speak, to think, to explore. English language arts is the only class that is required for the entirety of a child's public education. So our demurring from that, because we might be afraid of a text, becomes very complicated, because first we have to understand that any text can be challenged. And that's something that I think younger teachers, particularly those who have been teaching for, let's say, less than 20 years, they would not be familiar with that idea that just one parent can come in and say, I want that book out. And if it's the right district, And with the right superintendent or whatever, the book can be gone, and gone not just from that district, but the way books are published, it could be gone from the entirety of a number of states, the way books are sold. So it's that we have to understand the monumental part of the censorship and the banning. And if we feel that we are uncomfortable, what libraries and librarians and teachers such as myself and others have to do is step up to the plate and just say, if you need help, just ask. And I think sometimes, and I don't blame teachers, it's easy for you to say that, but it's, are you really going to be there? And yeah, you do have to be there to do whatever you can do to help them. And that is very important. Having a support system, knowing that you live in a community where your librarians and your libraries are safe spaces for parents and children, knowing that teachers can come in and say, okay, I need some images, something, I need newspaper articles, whatever, to help me have students actually see what they're doing, what they're reading about. And then having, again, as I say, for me, nothing beats a teacher coming in saying, I'm here to help. And what do you want? What do your students want? What do they need? How can we do it? And I've not been beyond calling on friends. There were times when I've called on Professor Morrison to talk to middle schoolers, or Jimmy Santiago Baca to talk with some kids. It just depends. I'll do whatever I need to do and sort of say, you have to do this to help the kids. Because that makes a difference with them. If they've never, for example, at Harvard, there was a group of students, my graduate students, student teaching, and some complaints came up about the teacher, and Professor Morrison helped the entire class by my students asking her questions. But more importantly, we decided that with a group of challenged readers that we would get them a set of books. Luis Rodriguez always running, that my husband and I would buy books, give them to the students, and they could come to Harvard and talk with Luis Rodriguez, only if they read the book. That was the catch for them. And that was amazing, because the last question that a student asked Luis before the conference call ended was, how do I avoid the grave like you did? And so, I mean, it's trying to think about how can we rethink what a classroom or a learning situation or a learning environment looks like. How can you leverage helping our colleagues, helping build our communities, like what we're doing right now?
I'm most terrified of the self-censorship as well, because I've gotten reports of school librarians saying, okay, I know this book is on this list and I want to promote it, but isn't it drawing too much attention to this issue? And is it a safe thing is it the smart move to do? Is it the safe move to do? And seeing the threats that school librarians, and teachers are fielding, yeah, I feel for them. I'm scared with them. I don't want any of my colleagues to be victims of violence. The other part of that is, what power and privilege do our colleagues have in speaking up for us? And just like you, I've relied on colleagues to take a hit when I couldn't. And I've said, hey, this isn't something I can do, but you have a position and you have privilege. And I think you can take this hit in a way that I can't. So can I rely on you to be that ally that I need? And they have. I've been very lucky. I've asked for help and I've received it. And I think that's a really powerful model to use elsewhere. This model of mutual aid and care, to take these hits and check where our privilege and power is and spend out that privilege and power for the freedom to read.
So I have one more question before I open it up to the audience. So anyone tuning in, please put your questions in the Q&A because I'm going to get to them next. But my last question for you both is, just as an average citizen, how can an average citizen sort of champion the right to freedom to read? I mean, should they go to school board meetings? Should they write letters to the editor? What do you recommend for people who just want to champion this idea?
Which one of us do you want to go first?
Jocelyn.
Okay. I think that sitting on the sidelines is no longer acceptable. If you are in your community, it doesn't matter if one has children. It doesn't matter if you have basically no interest in schools, but you should, because these are people who are going to be living next to you or working with you or whatever. We have to go back to our caring about our children, and we have to invest in them. They're our future. And this generation in particular is so important. They need that support. And we don't always know where our children are coming from. You know, if they're coming from a solid home, a broken home, a blended home. I mean, we just don't know. And teachers are having to navigate that terrain as well. So having people, having community people, other teachers from other districts, scholars, the Center for Mark Twain Studies had its quadrennial a couple of weeks ago. And I Zoomed that session because I wanted to say to my colleagues, yes, you need to, I didn't say to them, come out of the clouds, but I sort of said that you need to come out and help the schools. You need to talk to the schools and help the libraries. We are the scholars for Mark Twain. We should be there as resources, as ongoing resources. And for any banned book or any book, you know, I mean, it's just letting schools know, letting librarians and libraries know, wherever they are, that we support you. Whatever that needs, you know, whatever that means, whatever that entails, if it's a tweet or a letter or just doing something to let them know that we appreciate you, we support you, that's what we need to do. And everyone needs to do it. This is a universal call for action.
I'm reminded of my wonderful high school US history teacher. And whenever there's the argument that says like, oh, we need to remove this book to protect the children, that like the sanctity of their childhood, at the end of 18 years, your best efforts does not result in the perfect child. And as awful as it is saying this as a woman without children, but after 18 years, you do not have a perfect child. You have an adult who's expected to vote, who's expected to participate in civic life, who's expected to be a member of society. And we do a disservice to children when we try and shield them and protect them. There are certainly age-appropriate ways to discuss tough topics, but kids are inquisitive and kids are curious. And the best thing we could do as adults is to honor that and prepare them for adulthood the best we can. It's small steps over 2 decades of doing this. And I think that's hard work. It's not easy, but they're willing to put in the work to be these immensely thoughtful people at their young ages. And the best thing we could do is honor that. But I agree with you, Jocelyn, that I don't think anybody could stand by the sidelines anymore because it's happening at a fast and furious rate. People should be attending their board meetings. They should be attending school library board meetings and speaking up and speaking out if they are able to, bringing signs, but also looking for those in the community that are already organizing. When these things are happening, there are always organizers who are ready, who are gung-ho, who have a vision and have an idea of what to do and go ahead with it. Find those people, provide support to them. You don't have to go it alone. You just have to find your people.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and vote. Absolutely vote.
Yes. It's a good day to remind people.
Yes, it's a good day always to remind
Yes.
people, absolutely vote. And if you're voting in the local elections, there's not always a whole lot of people there. You might think your voice is insignificant. I'm telling you, it's not. Run for those offices. Consider those boards and commission positions. If you are upset about that, go commit, run for it. I believe in you. If nothing else, I believe in you. And you should run for those positions.
I second that too.
One of our local elections a few years ago, the person won by one vote, and then they did a recount and they found that the other person actually had won. So you local elections, you really can make a difference by voting.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm looking at the Q&A box from our audience. The first question is about sort of the nuts and bolts of teaching Huckleberry Finn. So, obviously the very painful N word is very prevalent in that book. So how nowadays do you teach it, knowing that students are going to read that word frequently?
I've had students ask me about that, and I'm always, as Samantha said, I'm very clear and honest with them. I don't like profanity of any sort from my colleagues. I've even told them in meetings, you're violating my ear space, so please just stop. I don't want to hear it. I don't use racial slurs. However, I defend the right of authors and artists to use terms that are applicable to that period. And I have to stay true to that. And I explain that to students, and I read those passages myself to students, and I tell them how hard it is for me to read those passages. And not just in it for any author who uses them. Morrison uses it, as I talked about, Dr. King in Letter from a Birmingham Jail. It's very difficult if I'm reading that text aloud. I tell teachers, if they are uncomfortable, say that to students. Just tell them, I'm uncomfortable. Yes, and deal with the racial slur. Don't change it. I had a colleague who came to me and said, I put you as a part of in my book, citing, that what I want to do is help Black people because I know that you're hurt by using it. And I said, wait, I'm sorry. As a Black person, I don't need your help to read Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I think it's insulting that that's what you're thinking that you're doing. So I'm really not happy that you put me in your book. And so we're done. And we've been done ever since. Because that is very presumptive to assume that I need protection from someone else because I cannot deal with that word. Our classrooms should be a place where students can ask those questions and understand that there are rules. We do not address each other with racial slurs. We do not address each other with words about how one looks, one dresses, whatever. But the literature is the literature, or the art is the art. And so we want to explore that. And so it's very, very important for teachers first to either feel comfortable with it or to find someone, as Sam said, bring a target. I totally understand part of my role as a teacher who happens to be of color, a woman, and a 19th century specialist, that it's a moving target that people can use and say, she said it, I didn't say it. And I can say, that's right, I did. Yes, I'm good with that. And that's a good thing. I mean, that's how we're helping each other. So navigating that language is critically important. And also, I think what sometimes gets lost in this is that we don't pay enough attention as to when the racial slur is not used. For example, in the last third of the novel, when Huck pretends to be Tom and he uses the word nigger, but then when he is Huck and he's thinking about Jim and making his decisions, Huck never says that. Once he says, I apologize to Jim, I felt so mean, I wouldn't have played that on him had I known that it would have made him feel, and I will never do that again. And he doesn't. Does that mean, as students have said, does that mean he's not a racist? And my answer is, who said he was a racist from the beginning of the novel? He's a kid. He's a kid reflecting his environment. Does that make him a racist? I think he doesn't know what he is. And it's through that relationship with Jim and his other relationship that started in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, where we begin to see the evolution of Huck Finn, who just finally says, I'm out of here. Don't know where I'm going, but I don't like it. I don't like all the stuff that's been happening. And Jim is free. Jim makes a huge decision to stay enslaved in order to help. I mean, so that's another learning curve for Huck Finn, that this guy is not just a dad or father, but he sacrifices himself, knowing that he would be sent back to slavery. That is a huge lesson that Twain is going through in that particular novel. So of all of the novels that I have read and taught, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, to me, is the iconic one that illustrates in America our issues with race and difference and other, how we navigate it, how we don't navigate it, how we muck it up, how we try to do weird things to it. And somehow these two people come out of it okay.
Mm-hmm.
Not perfect, just okay.
Thank you. There's lots of praise in the Q&A. People praising you for prioritizing student engagement. Bravo for the work you are doing. Someone said, can you address your opinion about sending a literature syllabus to parents prior to the year to alleviate their fear of what their children will be learning? I think I'm assuming they're trying to ask, do you think that's a good idea, a bad idea? What do you think about that?
I like that idea if before parents are allowed to come and visit the teachers. There are a couple of things here. If I'm a parent and I don't know this new teacher, I'd like to kind of lay eyes on the teacher so I can say, okay, so who are you and where'd you come from and what are you doing? And I don't know if they still have parent night, and I know that not all the parents come out. The part of what teachers need to do, I think that I would suggest, and I'm not suggesting anything I don't do, okay? So I would suggest try to meet the parents if you can. If you can't, one of the things I did when I did teach high school was to make sure that every reporting period, that halfway period where you send out the little notices to parents saying, Jocelyn is not doing well, she might fail. I asked my principal for a whole pad. So I could say I had 135 students when I started it. So I had 135 of those things that went out to parents saying, well, Erin's doing great. Just wanted you to know she's doing well in class. Sam's good. Sam asks a lot of questions and she's bubbly. Just wanted you to know this. And John is having a little bit of trouble. I would like to have you come in and let's talk about it. So everyone got a slip in the class, but the parents got the slips. Or, and I know other teachers who just give calls or something to let parents know that they're trying, that they're really vested in their kids. And the syllabus going out is a good thing. I think I would say the title, précis of what the novel includes, and maybe a statement by each teacher, letting parents know that your goal is not to change the children, it's to give them the idea of reading and challenges and inquiry and exploration and discovery. That's the point. You're not trying to move them in one direction or the other. And I think at the end of the day, that's what parents are mostly frightened about. Mm-hmm. And what sometimes community people who are outside of the community are coming in and are stoking those fires that they're changing your kids. And that's not happening. I've never met an English teacher who wakes up every morning and says, I think I will go and create anarchy among my students. Haven't met, I'm sure there's one out there, but I haven't met that person yet.
Yeah, I know some libraries have started requiring if someone challenges a book in their collection, they have to be a member of their community. Because Sam, you could probably attest to this, people would be receiving challenges from across the country because it got written up somewhere that they had some controversial book in their collection. It's sometimes the internet makes things more complicated.
Yeah. I've seen copycat challenges after something has hit the news. Other libraries get the same challenge. And on those challenge forms, I think most libraries have a line in there that says, like, have you read the entirety of the book? Because passages out of context
Right.
doesn't mean a whole lot. You need to take the whole work and understand it and know what the context is and be able to understand what's going on. If you take anything out of context, it looks really bad. But that's not enough to dismiss the entirety of the work. The greatest example is in American court legal history is Ulysses. I mean, Ulysses was a serial from James Joyce that was released in the US in serial format. And like there's this one chapter taken wildly out of context, and it was enough for the book to get banned. And only after, I forget which judge this is, I really regret not having my memory with me right now, but this judge in assessing its obscenities, trying to apply the obscenity test, read the entirety of it. And I don't know if anybody else has tried to read James Joyce without an English professor. It's not easy. Oh my gosh, I've struggled. I come back to that every like 3 years or so, and then I go, oh no, like I can't. So kudos to that judge. But he said, okay, I can see how there are some scenes that might be upsetting. However, the entirety of the work is to be considered, and the entirety of the work is not obscene or pornographic, and it's fine. Books should not be taken. Scenes from books should not be taken out of context. It's worthwhile reading the whole book and seeing its entire value.
There's one more question in the Q&A in addition to some other nice positive comments. But the question is, it's becoming harder to maintain the necessary hope that we can experience any success speaking with parents who don't understand or believe in freedom to read as we here do. Do either of you have a story of something you have done or said that resulted over time in even a small success you have had in influencing even one resistant book banning supporter?
I do. I went to a state to work with teachers, southern state, that's important. And I was met at the airport by a group of men, and they were polite, and they told me that they were against teaching Adventures of Huckleberry Finn because it just wasn't being taught correctly, and they hated it because it was a racist book. And I said, well, you know, did you read it? And they said yes, and that's why we want the book banned, because of the way our teachers taught it. Now, these men were way older than I was at that time, and that's important because they were bringing 30 years worth of memory to bear on a moment of a different generation with totally different teachers, totally different administrations, and they were stuck where they were. They remembered what that was like, how they felt. And I could sympathize with them. I get it. I said, I get that, but I need to go into the schools and just try to figure out how this is working. And what we had in that district was, after I worked with the students, then we had an entire community meeting with the board behind me, parents in the audience, and I was fielding questions, and students and teachers were there as well. So we were all in the auditorium. And one parent said to me, and I'm asking everyone to forgive me, but you need to hear the quote. We don't need a little bit of light brown sugar down here telling us what we need to do. Yes, Sam, I looked at your eyebrows. Welcome to my world. And the person was not, as some you may think that the person was white, the person wasn't. So see, again, my world is I never know where it's coming from. And I remember thinking, Jocelyn, process. process quickly because you're what are you going to say? And my comment to that person was, you haven't been here the last week. I've been here every day with all of these students, and I'm not sensing a racially hostile environment in these English classes. I'm sensing that the students are reticent to ask questions, or that the teachers are a little bit reticent to engage with that, but we're working on that. We're talking about how we can better do that, how we can work that through. At the end of that session, the wife of the guy who said what he said, she brought him up for him to apologize. And I looked at him and I said, hey, look, you know, you're a parent. I get it. I get how you feel, but I'm here to help. Whatever I look like to you, I'm just here to go home. And so, yeah, that it was a moment where, I mean, he literally sucked the air right out of the room because there were kids coming to the mics like you talked about, you and Sam talked about earlier, Aaron, kids coming and voicing their complaints and saying that they wanted to read these texts, and teachers being impassioned. And so it was a very weird moment, but it was a good moment because the books were kept, and the school then decided, the district decided to create a document, and a lot of districts have them now, by which they review all the books and teachers. And I kept going back to that state, I guess maybe 4 or 5 times back in the day.
How about you, Sam?
Well, I'm thinking back to your story, Jocelyn, and I think about like what is comfort in learning, and comfort in learning is sort of like an oxymoron. There is no comfort in learning, and in texts like Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, there is going to be a lot of discomfort, and that's how you learn. Especially when I'm thinking about that class you had with the majority of white students. They were deeply uncomfortable, but in that discomfort, what I'm hearing from that story is that they had this beautiful moment of empathy for you, and knowing that there was some bit of uncomfort there. And I think in banning a book or restricting access it or limiting teachers' ability to teach it, we're not creating the opportunities for students to develop that empathy in a way that makes them better people. I feel like I go through life a lot better when I have more empathetic people, that they've practiced this empathy skill, that they've done the critical thinking, that they've been uncomfortable and can empathize with people that are different from them. And discomfort is not fun, not great, but that's where learning is. And I've completely forgotten your question, Erin.
It was
so well.
It was a question from the audience, and it sounded like they are feeling like they need a little optimism. So they wanted stories of when you felt like you've really moved the needle on someone's view of book censorship. I mean, Sam, I feel like I can come up with a million stories of how you've moved the needle. So I can brag about you if you want.
How I moved the needle. I don't know that I have, but I think, yeah, I don't know that I've moved the needle for those who were ardently opposed to the book. I think speaking out for a book or against censorship, I've definitely like swayed more people that were like somewhere in the middle and tipped them over to our side. Would-be book censors and book censors are gonna censor, and sometimes we can change them over, but sometimes it's just as important to say it out loud, even if it feels like you're yelling against a brick wall, because there's always another set of ears who are hearing it. And I'm cognizant of the audience, of the ones who aren't saying anything, and I want them to know that there is another side to this, and being vocal about it, I think it's worthwhile to do.
For that hope, just remember you're not alone. You have people you can reach out to help. You're not by yourselves. You're not. I promise, you're not.
Mhm.
That's very important to remember.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn and Sam, for joining us tonight. On behalf of all the sponsors and supporters who made this program possible, we extend our deepest gratitude to Dr. Chadwick and Samantha Lee. It's with gratitude that we thank the staff and volunteers of the Reading League of Women Voters, as well as the Mark Twain Library, for making this production possible. This evening's conversation will be just as enlightening in rerun, so don't forget to spread the word about the library's YouTube channel. And of course, thank you to all of you who joined us here this evening, especially the ones who asked questions. And I don't know how I can just say thank you in more ways than I just did, because I really feel very grateful for both of you joining us tonight, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Sam. It was great. Let's keep that conversation going about Ulysses.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Now I have to try and read it. Okay.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Elaine. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone who attended. It's been great.